Well, thank you, Dominic. Thanks for the opportunity to be here at Google. Thanks for the opportunity to be able to share some space and time with you at this lunchtime. I'm very excited to be able to share a little bit about my experience and expertise with Chief Diversity Officers, and I'm really happy to see you that you're taking time to really learn about a topic that I'm very passionate about, and I think is very pertinent for the work of colleges, universities, and organizations today. To begin, I'd like to tell you a little bit about what I envision this session could be, or how we're going to spend the time. So I would like to share a little bit of insight about my academic journey, because I think it will explain why I'm interested in the topic. I would like to situate the work of the CDO, to think about how they are change agents in higher education. I would like to share my understanding about the work of the CDO, and also I will be more than happy to welcome questions that in a lively discussion stemming from some of the facts or some of the information I'm going to present to you. My interest in the topic stems from my time in grad school. As you might think about grad school or think about what do you do in college, it's a time in which you have to find something that you're passionate about. In this case, I was pursuing my master's and doctorate at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I was there roughly from 2005 to 2010. And when I had the task to find a topic for my dissertation, I had to figure out what topic will move me into the next stage of my career. Like, what topic will have me interested for long enough, but yet will allow me to complete a dissertation, which is this large document, to be able to say I'm an expert in this part of the field. And at that time, I had worked in places such as international student services. I had worked in study abroad. I have worked with communities that foster a sense of engagement for international students, and I have also served at pre-college programs. So that was my background, and that was sort of my work experience while I was in grad school. So I was trying to find a topic that sort of suited those experiences and also was a good choice for an academic pursuit such as a dissertation or a journal in the future. As I did that, one of the aspects that got me interested in the topic is that I had the opportunity to sit in a committee. Many of you probably have done that, in which you are tasked to serve in a committee and be able to do something for the good of the institution. In this case, the committee was the diversity committee, and this committee was the wide campus committee, meaning it call for representatives of all areas of the campus. That would be faculty, students, administrators, community members, and this was a committee that was tasked to sort of move the diversity agenda forward at the institution. After being in the committee, I believe for like 2 years, I think in my third year, I volunteered to co-chair the committee, because not only I was an eager student to be able to undertake this task, but I also really had a passion for the leadership that had come into the institution. What occurred is that in 2008, Dr. Damon Williams was appointed as the first Chief Diversity Officer at University of Wisconsin-Madison. Maybe you recognize his name because he was just recently recognized at the bicentennial event at the University of Michigan, appointed as the person that gave the speech, and also has written extensively about CDOs. So I was really happy to have an expert in the field in Chief Diversity Officers and someone that was starting as the first person and also co-chairing the committee with. At that time, you might say the topic finds you. So I was interested in writing about Chief Diversity Officers. Why? Because I had an extensive period of time in which I was witnessing how someone in that role could move an institution forward. As I think about or give a brief definition to set our context, or just to set what a Chief Diversity Officer is, as you think about it in the context of academic institutions, a CDO will be a person or an individual that reports to the president of the provost, has a direct line, and also is a person that is the highest diversity rank administrator at the institution. When we think about what CDOs do, I think like the timeline of the talk does not allow us to delve into exactly how you will define it, describe it, and sort of talk about the position, but roughly it's a person that coordinates, leads, enhances, and sometimes supervises the formal diversity capabilities of the institution. And by diversity capabilities, you can include people, you can include programs, you could include centers, you can include resources. So everything that deals with diversity, this person could come in and integrate, coordinate, facilitate, or bring together to be able to maximize resources when you are at an institution. When you think about your work as a doctoral student, the biggest thing that you have to do is, what question do you want to answer? And how do you create a good dissertation? Meaning, you're going to spend a lot of time looking at this document in front of your computer. You're going to spend a lot of time looking at this document and pages and editing. So it has to be something that catches your attention, but also catches the attentions of others that are willing or that will read this document. So when I was thinking about what to do, I knew I wanted to know a little bit more about the CDO, and I also knew that I had to add on what has already been said about the CDO. So those are the two things that I was kind of keeping in mind. And what was happening at that time is when I met Dr. Williams, he was actively working in publishing these two books. You can see the Strategic Diversity Leadership in Higher Education and the Chief Diversity Officer. So these two books were projects that he was actively working on while I was also at the university. So I not only had to add to the literature, but I was also sort of like competing to understand what will I add to what has been written if you're going to publish two books when I finish my dissertation. And the timeline sort of worked that he was kind enough to share some of the first printouts or like the drafts of the books for me to sort of enhance my understanding. But also then I knew that I needed to publish something beyond that to further my understanding given what he was going to come up with the books, which today are pretty much the premier books that people and institutions have adopted to understand the role of CDOs in higher education institutions. So as I did that, I figured that there was one aspect of the literature that he presented that I was really interested on, and that was the organizational design of the position of the CDO. Like so far, when I heard people talk about the CDO, they will mention the CDO is a person, the CDO is an individual. But when you really look at the literature, the CDO could be an office, a unit. It could be a whole team of people that work under the leadership of the CDO. So I was interested then in discovering questions that dealt with the organization. I was interested in questions that dealt with how do you actually do your work? So what strategies do you utilize? And then today I will connect that to how is that important for the work that I do today and for the work that you might do today at Google. So for the first one, when you think about organizational structure, you might think about roles. You can think about reporting structure, so who supervises, what is your authority over other people. And you can also think about budget and resources. So the role of the position is like everything that allows you to do the work that you do, given who is around you and who you have as a team or team member or supervision. One thing that was out there that I benefited from is that when people did research about CDOs, they had established that if you looked at all the CDOs that were present in institutions of higher education at that time, you can roughly put them in three models and said, you know, some CDOs fall under the collaborative CDO model, some CDOs fall under the unit-based CDO model, and some CDOs fall under the portfolio divisional CDO model. So I will explain in a little bit what those models mean. But roughly, if you took every one, you could say, this is a framework that allows you to somewhat say your structure is similar to what this model presents. As we talked about that, this was the breakdown in which in 2007, those CDOs were organized. And you can see that roughly the largest representation of CDOs fell under the collaborative CDO model. Then we have the unit-based CDO model second, and then a very small proportion of CDOs across the nation were under the portfolio divisional one. And that was based on a survey that Dr. Williams conducted and reached about 110 CDOs and about 70 interviews with people that were currently in that role. So why is that important? At that point, I knew that I wanted to explore what strategies do people in the position of CDO pursue to develop, maximize, and manage diversity? But also, I wanted to know, does being in one of these configurations actually influence how you do your work? Does it influence how you adapt strategies? Does it influence how you execute your diversity work? All right? So when I was doing my study, one of the things that I had to keep in mind is that when you compare something, it is beneficial at times when you actually compare things that are similar. So I could not pick one CDO working at a very small school with 500 students and then pick a CDO at a school with 50,000 students in which the configurations were roughly super different and would not allow for a fair comparison. So what I thought about is that I wanted to find commonalities about a sample for me to allow me to do that comparison. So I compared first institutions that had adopted a strategic diversity plan. Then I wanted a CDO that was reporting to the president of provost, because at that time people were trying to figure out what a CDO was. So there were different configurations. They will call someone with authority and diversity a CDO, but technically that person needed to report to the president of provost when we were talking about the role defined. And also I wanted to find representation of models that actually represented the characteristics of each of the configurations. So add some fidelity to, like, okay, I can see you sort of check all those things that you are a good representation of a CDO model in this type. And then I found three models at three CDOs at three institutions, and I decided that I needed to find the same institution, meaning that I picked research universities that had the three different models. So at the end of the day, I had the three models represented in similar size institutions with similar size and population of students, with similar locations, and the difference was that they had those three different models. So I could also do the comparison. So as I think about what happened in 2013, you see a little evolution of models sort of moving towards developing more portfolio divisional models, but also reducing the number of collaborative CDOs. And I will go into explaining what does that look like and why are they important when you think about structure. So this is what I found. So when I went and did my research, graphically, this is what a CDO configuration at the collaborative level will look like. You know, it's pretty flat. You will have the CDO person or the individual representing that position, and under that person had three admin staff, which could be someone that helps them with tasks in the office, could be someone that helps anywhere from payroll to organizing events, to someone that does anything that that person needs to run the office itself. At that time, the fourth position was being negotiated and requested for that person to be able to fulfill the duties of the CDO. So graphically, it looked like that. But when you think about the things that I've been mentioning as to what does a CDO do, so in this model basically values collaboration and lateral coordination, meaning this person is actively trying to build partnerships horizontally and vertically in the organization. Two, they have very small support staff, meaning they probably have 2 or 3 people that deal with an office, but they are responsible for diversity in the entire institution, or at least that is the perception that you have when you bring a chief diversity officer to an institution. 2 or 3, they had no reporting units. So no units across campus reported to that person. And then there was no one which was a diversity officer perhaps in a program or a school that actually reported to them. So when you think about your organizational hierarchy here in Google, so this would be a person that is a one-person office. And you maybe have 2 or 3 support staff, and you do what you need to do with your team. And that is how things get done. But there is very little hierarchy as to who reports to you to be able to say, where are we with this project? It's more, you try to convince people that this is important. Thinking about the unit-based CDO, the second model. So in this model, you see it's not as flat as the unit-based CDO. In this case, you have now program associates, which were not only program administrators. So the people involved in this configuration also provided expertise to be able to carry out diversity work, having expertise in the field, in the topics, and being able to work with the CDO directly beyond just supporting administrative tasks. Also, at the time in which I was exploring this, the institution where I was exploring this, we're thinking about moving a couple units on campus under the supervision of this role, okay? And As you might imagine, some of the characteristics are still the same, but what changes from model to model is in this one, you actually start supervising other folks that deal with diversity across campus. You actually have a broader span of priorities because now you have your program associates sort of to devote to specific areas. And one of the areas could be faculty recruitment. Another area could be diversity training. Another area could be student success initiatives. So now you have people appointed to specific areas that might be associated with what you do, okay? And in this case, when you compare a one-person office to a person that has program associates, in this configuration, you're more likely to be involved with the day-to-day implementation of the tasks of activities that take place across campus. Why? Simply, you have 3 or 4 people that are actually actively working with those versus being one-person office that you might need to deal with everything just in the little time that you have. And then the third model that I found is the portfolio divisional CDO. So graphically, it's apparent that the structure is not flat. It's apparent that there's a lot more program associates. It's apparent that there is assistant to those associates. There's also admin support. And there's also 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 reporting units to this person. So in this configuration, all these units with the staff that they have and the admin staff that they have, they don't only do their work in a silo, but they also report to the CDO, meaning the CDO establishes the strategic plan for all these units and for the people that report to this person. So roughly, those 3 models, that's how they vary. And when you looked at the CDO portfolio divisional configuration, you can see that now you have administrative staff, you have program associates, you can have people deal with technical or marketing or other aspects of the work that you do. You have reporting units. You supervise other diversity officers in the institution, but you still value collaboration. You still value being able to get a lot of aspects of diversity work done. But one thing that occurs is that this model was very uncommon across colleges and universities. And you can have your hints as to why it might have been uncommon. Well, it might have been expensive to run an office with that many units or people supporting the CDO, and also moving resources under a CDO and saying you do the diversity work with all these people under you might not have been the first thing that people wanted to do when created a model. They might have appointed one person first as a CDO collaborative officer rather than establishing an entire division from the get-go, okay? So what did I find? Because I wanted to find if being one of those models influenced what you were able to do. So what strategies did CDOs in this position utilize to carry out work? Well, when I looked at what had been written about it, I could see that CDOs broadly focus in several areas that deal with diversity. One of those areas was educational strategies. So they were there to educate the campus about the value of diversity. They focus on communication strategies, which was communicate diversity into the mission, vision, and goals with the entire institution. They focus on entrepreneurial strategies, which is basically raising money or finances devoted to the work that you do pertaining to diversity. They engage with symbolic strategies, which is how do you influence the campus culture in relation to messages that pertain to diversity. They engage with accountability strategies, where it's establishing indicators about how you assess diversity progress. And also, they engage with research strategies, meaning they did research to figure out what does diversity look like or what's the interpretation of diversity on their campus. So this is what had been written about CDOs when I got to the point in which I was doing my own research. And when I did my research, I was able to figure out that they also do 2 additional things. One is they engage with diversity research, meaning they actively collaborate with faculty and other people interested in researching topics that are associated with diversity. And also, they directly sometimes focus on recruitment strategies for faculty and students. So building pipelines, or students building pipelines, or faculty to come into the institution. So when someone says, what do diversity officers do? These are the categories that you could be like, they focus on these 7 sort of types of strategies to carry out their work. But I wanted to move in a step further to figure out, what does that actually mean? What do you actually do day to day? When you say you educate the campus, what do you do? Okay, so my goal was to sort of create a chart that will allow me to capture the day-to-day activities that these CDOs were doing. And remember that when I mention CDOs, I am mentioning the staff of the CDO, the office of the CDO. So the whole structure that carries the work that the CDO represents. So when we look at educational strategies, when I looked at the 3 positions that I was interviewing or that I did research on at the 3 different institutions, you can see one thing. Well, roughly, they were doing similar stuff, right? Like, it looks like all of them were doing similar efforts in educating the campus. So it seemed that educating the campus about the role of the CDO was pertinent. And it made sense. Why? Because the positions were new. They were just established across many campuses. So not many campuses have actually seen a position like that. So they were asking, well, what does this position do? Or what is it supposed to do? So it makes sense that all of them began by doing that. Then we move to communication strategies. You see things like, for instance, CDOs spend time to develop a website for their offices. They spend time to be present at public events. They spend time soliciting input from campus to be able to draft communications. And once again, roughly, it appears that the 3 configurations were doing the same tasks. But as we move through the configurations and to the type of strategies that they have, then I found out that some of the differences started to emerge as to how much these roles sort of had accomplished while they have focused on diversity work. And you can imagine that at the time in which I was interviewing the people in these positions and the people that reported to the CDOs, they had roughly been on the position the same amount of time, okay? And they had or operated in institutions that were of the same size. So for me, I was curious as to, well, what is different among what you chose to do? And this is where I started seeing those differences. For instance, in this end, I saw that accountability strategies to be able to figure out if the campus is making progress towards diversity goals, it started to be a little bit more of a priority for the portfolio CDO and the unit-based CDO. And as I moved through more strategies, like research strategies, as I moved through other aspects, I think you can see now that the differences were pretty apparent. Like the folks in the collaborative model or the folks in the smaller, more flat model were not devoting any time to fulfill any of the responsibilities of the other type of strategies. And why was this important? Well, I then figured out that one, well, they were not moving the diversity agenda in those areas. I understood that often it dealt with if you have one person doing this type of work, it's unlikely you will focus on those priorities. But I also start to discover that the depth in which they were moving these agendas forward varied greatly. So even when we had them all check educational strategies, and they all were, for instance, sending a message to campus, the depth of that message, who was in charge of that message, how often the message was repeated, it just varied greatly also because of the structure. So how is this relevant at all for the work that I do or for the work that you might do, knowing that, for instance, Google has a chief diversity officer? The chief diversity officers actually emerge in the business sector. So in higher education, they might be a newer position, but sort of copied from the business sector to be able to move diversity forward. So when one thinks about the CDO, one criticism that you might get is that when you hire a CDO, this person arrives to campus, and then guess what? Diversity becomes a priority once they're hired. Well, that is definitely not the case. Like, that is just, I wish it was, but when you hire this person, or once you have hired a union, a division, people will assume that everything related to diversity now is awesome, or it works, or it will now pave the way for future generations. And I think one part that we actually do not look at is that we fail to consider, like, how do you envision once you hire this person, how are they going to spend their time at the institution? So if you hire someone as a CDO at Google, like, what do you envision them to do? Do you expect them to sort of take part in committee leaderships? Do you expect them to, like, travel around the offices in Google and communicate a message? Do you expect them to sort of focus on affirmative action and compliance? Do you want them to produce reports? So figuring out what priorities have been established for that person is something that it's important, but also is how are you going to support that person as an institution once they are appointed in that role? So when you think about other divisions in the company, like most of your units might have a budget, might have people in different roles, might have a staff, they have a reporting structure, they have a buy-in from the leadership. And in this case, what we ask is, when you appoint a CDO, does this person have the same buy-in that as other executive level people in the firm? Because what? They have the C title, right? They're an executive officer. They report directly to the provost. But do they have the same budget or similar budget than other units, or similar access, or similar support, or people, or reporting units? Well, this is where the disparities start to merge. So how is this work related to the work that I do? And I'm a faculty member. So today, if you know anything about faculty members, you might be like, what do you do on campus? Well, you often find us or see us teaching, right? You see us or read or know that we are often reading and doing research, and that's why we are looking at our laptops a lot. And then also one part that is not as visible is that we take part into service, meaning like we devote time to being committees that deal something with service in the institution, or our peers, or our programs, or our students. So roughly, this is how faculty or professor life sort of is divided. But as you think about professor life across the spectrum of institutions, it might look very different. In some institutions, research might take a biggest chunk of your time. Teaching might not be as big, or it might actually be more important than research. And service might actually be considerably larger than you expected coming into an institution. So when you think about a faculty member, and in my case, I'm going to describe to you what do I do for research, teaching, and service that could benefit from the presence of a CDO, okay? So I have been engaged with a few things that when listing, I don't think these things are that unusual. So I do think faculty members do engage with this type of work. So on my campus, I have published articles, meaning that I have engaged in producing a scholarship, right? 2, I have pursued grants for funding those research projects. 3, I have prepared graduate students or my team to be able to conduct research. I have also taught courses and organized workshops on campus for a topic that I might have an expertise. I have also chaired search committees to be able to bring new people to campus and to be able to identify diverse candidates. I have also support local community efforts or initiatives through or linked through my research or teaching interests. I have mentored junior faculty that came into our program or department to be able to sort of like make sure they are successful when they move into the next round of their career. I advise student organizations on campus. I have created initiatives on campus that are focused on fostering student success. And I have also contributed to create what we will call a pipeline of students that can come in institutions. And today I work at Eastern Michigan University, so with a focus to come to Eastern. So as you think about all those responsibilities, you might be able to make connections to the type of activities that you do. And the reason that I make that, or I make that point, is that when I think about the work of the CDO, I can see the CDO sort of engaging in this type of activities or this type of roles supporting my work. So for instance, a CDO can fund stuff, a CDO can serve as a platform, a CDO can offer leadership, a CDO can offer visibility and spaces, they can offer a strategic plan, they can be a partner, they can align resources, they can be a network or part of a network, and most important, they can drive sustainable change. But if I asked you to sort of reflect in these aspects, I think you might be able to identify folks here in your organization that are tasked with these priorities or with these roles. So when I move it back to connecting, how does this impact my work as a faculty member? I think about this. A CDO could offer funding for us to offer workshops for the campus to learn about a topic. A CDO could be a platform to be able to share publications of a scholarship of faculty members to be able to engage the campus in conversations pertinent to a new area or topic of research. A CDO could offer leadership to be able to understand how do we foster student success, not only from the top administrators, but also from the units that are engaged with this work. A CDO could advocate for visibility and spaces. For instance, finding a place in which student orgs can come, convene, and do the work that they want to do. A CDO could remind other administrators that a pipeline of students or crafting a path for students that are underrepresented should be part of the strategic plan. A CDO could be a partner, not only with funding, but also with the visibility with a campus community or with a local community when you do a project. Also, a CDO could align resources. If you have a new research project, there could be someone in the office of the CDO that offers a startup funding to conduct research. And sometimes that startup funding could be $500 to be able to pay for transcriptions of your interviews. The CDO could also be the person in which a network of faculty, staff, students that are passionate about this work revolve around this person, meaning that it could be a place where we train and mentor junior faculty to be able to understand their responsibility with respect to diversity. And also, a CDO could be someone that fosters sustainable change. Why? Because often that person could be part of what? Search committees. When you're bringing someone new to the organization, that is the biggest task that we have in front of us. Like, who we bring literally means that they will shape and continue to shape how our organization moves forward. So thinking about the CDO and thinking about what they do, I find a lot of correlations with what you do daily around your work on campus. I am very pleased, for instance, that you have convened here over the lunchtime to be able to access a workshop or a professional development opportunity. And today, sort of thinking about Hispanic Heritage Month just passed and being a person that represents that heritage, I'm really happy that a focus or support has been given to bring speakers that might be able to talk about the research in relation to a topic as important as diversity. So with that, I wanted to leave some space for you to ask questions and engage in a lively discussion of how do you think this role connects with some of the things that you're doing here at Google or some of the things that you are engaged in your daily activities. And I'm going to leave this slide up sort of just to guide us in the potential aspects that I have identified as I saw connections of CDOs actively working with this, but most valuable, I saw connections of actively people like you in the institutions doing the work. Because as I mentioned it, once we hire a CDO, diversity doesn't become a priority the next day. It's when you as an individual engage with that type of work, and having a CDO could be beneficial to offer you a platform for that. So thank you.
Well, I can start out with a question. Thank you again so much for taking time out of your day to be here. So in your research, I'm curious to know if there was a singular or maybe a few of these categories that maybe fell short that had impacted most negatively maybe the experience of these units under a CDO, or then trickled down to impacting negatively the student body experience at those particular campuses.
I think your question is precise and is valuable. Why? Because when you think about each of the campuses, each of those campuses had a history. Each of those campuses were deal with issues that were pertinent to that campus at that time. So for some campuses, like the symbolic aspect of appointing a CDO was very relevant. For other campuses that had, for instance, worked about enhancing the number of women as a faculty member in a discipline was really important. So it was really context-based. So for those campuses, one of the things that was important for them, it was the presence of the CDO, the visibility of the CDO, but they also were trying to grasp the how do we move forward knowing that this position might not have everything that it needs to do the work that they need. So recognizing that, yes, appointing a person to do this work was important, but how do we move it to the next level and make sure they have the structure, the role, the budget, the support staff to make diversity priority. So it depends and it varies from campus to campus, but it also highlighted aspects from all those different venues. What I will tell you is that when we think about diversity work, we should not identify just one aspect and say this is what it will make diversity work. It's sort of like all these wheels have to move forward in the same direction. Otherwise, there will always be something important to someone or to a unit or to a group that we risk leaving out if we just decide to focus on certain aspects. So,
kind of piggybacking off of that, a thought that was kind of running through my mind is how does a CDO potentially lift up or amplify the voices of the most underrepresented individuals. And what I specifically am speaking to is like intersections of identities. And so you were just speaking to running the risk of potentially leaving out some of those highly specific groups. I guess I'm just curious, like, how do you even begin to amplify groups like that? How do you begin to learn about them? How do you begin to bring them into the organization when they themselves, from a physical standpoint, might only be one person?
Yep, absolutely. I think your question is very real. Meaning, I think that is a question that many folks or individuals or groups on campuses or at organizations might have today. And I think the best way for me to answer that question might be to give you some examples. So for instance, if I think about the type of workshops that are run on a campus, being able to incentivize people and support people to explore topics that deal with a specific group of students or faculty or staff or individuals might be a way in which you find now a space for those people to be able to be present on campus. The other part is that when you think about visibility of spaces, it could be anywhere from designated in a space in which you have allies and advocates to be able to designate months or dates or celebrations that deal with recognizing the valuable contributions of people that are identified with groups on campus that are today underrepresented. When you talk about publications, you could put a call as a CDO supporting areas of the literature that today are underrepresented, and could say we're specifically looking for scholars on campus that focus on A, B, or C areas that, you know what, there are not journals that really pushing that today, but you give them a venue to maybe jumpstart a journal to start your own field. And you see that in the literature. Today, you see many journals that before didn't exist. Like I published diversity work, and if you think about 50 years ago, there might not be a venue that truly value work on diversity. Today, you have the Journal of Diversity in Higher Education. You have other journals that specifically seek out to scholars that are interested in that type of work. Another way is network. You can create affinity groups. So as a CDO, you can really connect people inside of your institution that might not see each other every day. As a faculty member, I will tell you that we are in silos. We have a lot of control about what we do with our class, with our research, with our time. And sometimes when you even add technology, like the ability to teach online or be able to teach through computers, you're not even connected to the folks that work in your office. So you might be a little more distant. So what are those opportunities for me to run into someone that, in this case, represents my same identity on campus? I think you can think about my responsibility of finding those folks, but also what if the CDO could have an affinity group or support an affinity group or provide a space or even just add to the language in which those type of groups are valuable on campus and give them a goal and a purpose. So there's different ways in which I would say a CDO could contribute to connecting, giving voices, providing places for discussion, but also how do you integrate those things to the bigger conversation? When we think about a strategic planning, is there anything in the strategic plan that speaks to those needs, that speaks to those wants, that speaks to those identity groups? If there is not, then where do we see it reflected in the day-to-day activities that people on campus do that? And I think that's how they can leverage and be an advocate for those groups.
So there's a lot for a CDO to do. One thing at Google we've worked really hard on is not just increasing diversity, but once people hear that everyone feels they can be successful and included. Have you found in your research that there's like specific things a CDO or just groups in general that has the biggest impact on that aspect of encouraging inclusion throughout the environment? Yep.
So you hit the nail. You hit the nail right in the head, right? Meaning, a lot of people talk about diversity and inclusion and use the analogy, invite people to the dance, but then actually dance with them, right? And one of the analogies is that what makes people feel valuable in your organization. So I'll assure you that hiring a CDO does not make you feel valuable if you have never contacted that person, you have no idea of what a CDO does. And I'm reflecting as putting my student hat. If I was a student, it's unlikely I even know the name of the president, the provost, or the faculty senate, or anyone that deals with administration in your institution. You're likely to know maybe your advisor, but you're more likely to know who? Leaders in other student orgs, people that live in your floor, people that actually are connected to the type of programs that are offered to you. So my idea or my research, what it tells me is that how do we trickle down the actions and initiatives that the CDO does to parts of campus that people might see them as removed or silos. So if you're a student living in residential halls, right? As a CDO, how could you promote those spaces to be spaces in which you have a sense of belonging? So for instance, you could have a meeting or you could have a space in which you actively provide training to resident advisors to gain cultural competency. As a CDO, you could provide funds for the community, for instance, to purchase a book that you do a campus reading to really bring that community together over one topic. And all those examples, you might be like, well, anyone can do that. But also, if no one is doing that, someone with that vision, those ideas, and that leadership could jumpstart that in different pockets of campus. And I think that resonates with the previous question, is that there are going to be a lot of things that the CDO could do. Now, should they do all those things? Well, in an ideal world, yes. Can they do all those things? Well, the time has limited number of hours. You probably will find not every position looks like a portfolio divisional CDO. Resources are not as available in many of the institutions. But a CDO could be a person that has the expertise and knowledge to know where can I get the most return for my buck? Meaning strategically leading what we can accomplish knowing who we are. So maximizing who you are. And I think that's part of the leadership. You have leaders that they are brought to institutions to be able to move things forward because they know how to move things forward. So when you bring someone with an expertise in diversity, what you're expecting is you hire a person that is knowledgeable about all these aspects to be able to move the institution forward, even if it begins by purchasing a book or organizing a talk.
So in your experiences and in your research, how have you found is a great way to measure the impact? So for context, at Google, we're in a lot of employee resource groups, and sometimes it's hard to quantify impact. We use attendance numbers and things like that, but what has been successful in your experience?
Yep. Really good question. When you think about the responsibilities of the CDO, one of those was accountability, in which you're able to measure, well, how do we know that we are moving forward in this diversity scale or in this diversity platform? And you're right. Most of the times what we do is we refer to numbers, and we refer or really silo diversity into representation. And I think like representation is important. Like equity and being able to have people that represent society working for institutions is extremely important. But then it jumps to the next part. Besides just taking attendance, how would you measure that the contributions or the training or what you're implementing is really actually emerging in your day-to-day activities? And one part in which I can see that is by another example. So let's say that you have training that deals with cultural competency and bias reduction, okay? One of the best places in which you could see that is when you see people advocating and really understanding the search process to bring new candidates, and you make decisions like, hi, Nick, last year we only brought like 10 candidates. What can we do to enhance our pool this year? 2, are we advertising in the right places to be able to recruit the right candidates? 3, maybe we should spend some time thinking about where is our pipeline of candidates coming through to be able to get people that will be interested in working in Google in the future. So when I think about where do you see those measurements, you see them in the process. And that's why sustainability is pretty important. If you don't have procedures in which you have also now embedded diversity, then you keep just doing responsive or work that deals with crisis. Like how do you actually create process in which you now embed what you know about diversity, and now it becomes a natural aspect of the day-to-day things that you do as a higher manager, as a supervisor, or as a mentor. Think about a new colleague in your institution. How do you teach them the culture here when they come to your office? You might be like, well, I don't know, they just learn. Well, are there ways in which they provide training? Are there ways in which They read about who we are. Is there ways in which they are socialized? So I think having those things and being intentional about what is provided is really critical, because otherwise there's a fine line between intentionality and, well, we just do it when someone tells us to do so. And if it works, it's great. If not, we just check the box. And those are very two different things. The quality of interactions versus the quantity of things that you do. Like, you can check all the boxes for diversity training that you have, but when you do the evaluation, how valuable has it been? What do people report saying, this is how my day-to-day activities or role or leadership has changed? So how do we ask different questions versus, did you complete diversity training?
I have another question.
Absolutely.
Is there one thing that since your experience with CDOs, something that keeps them up at night? Like, is there like a one, like if you were to be like voicing maybe for a lot of CDOs, like, do you think that there's one topic or something that like might keep them up at night?
Keep them up at night. I think by having been in a few campuses as a student, as a staff, as a faculty, and by reading the news, I think a lot of the CDOs are kept at night by knowing that, for instance, a racial incident might occur at any time in our campuses. Knowing that a graffiti, or knowing that a message in a bathroom, or knowing that name calling on a campus road might be something that totally triggers the we are in crisis response, and you're not prepared to deal with that. And I think the ability that could move back work that you've done for years, it's something that probably keeps you worried, because it's sort of saying, you know that you have built a good foundation with the institution when you can respond to these incidents in a way that you truly know that is not who the institution is. But more important, your students know that. Your faculty know that. Your staff knows that. If those things happen and your students are not unsure as to whether you even support that, or your faculty are not unsure as to whether you have devoted enough time to that, a CDO probably will be worried about, how do I now spend time assuring or reassuring the campus that we care about this? Well, campus or people are going to need evidence, are going to need examples, are going to need that, what can I see in which I can see this work has been done? If they don't see that, I think that's an area in which they will be worried. And the other part is that engaging people beyond their staff. So we can have two things. You have a very small office, so you need to collaborate and try to engage everyone around you to move the diversity agenda. Not an ideal place. But also, if you have a large office, how do you engage those people that now feel that, well, you have a diversity officer and staff and teams, like, diversity is no longer my responsibility. So how do you do the dance between, actually, it only works when you take it as a priority, whether there's a CDO or whether it's not CDO. So I think those two things are things that all the campus that I talk grapple with and sort of convey and said, this is happening today, and it's totally causing, not trouble, but just not moving as fast as we would like to. And I will say it, like, the purpose of this presentation or sharing this with you is that I wanted to create the ability or foster a little bit of curiosity as to how do you engage with some of the activities that were shown in the areas in which you totally work today. So if it's marketing, if it's outreach, if it's PR, if it's tours. So I was really happy to see a tour coming in the door today. But I'm thinking, okay, like, how do you create a pipeline from those tours? Like, what do those tours take back once they go back to the places or communities that represent? It's sort of like actively thinking about, well, I am responsible for doing tours. How do you move it one more notch to incorporate the importance of diversity when those tours are designed, planned, implemented? Who do they get to see when they come here? Who do they get to talk? What do they get to talk about once they reach these doors? And I think, like, being intentional about our reflection is powerful. And I think that's what it comes with leadership. And that's what comes with experience. And I think as you move up, you realize and start seeing spaces in your organization that you had a blind side for before. You might be like, I never considered this as in this rank. But when you move as a supervisor, well, you should be able to see those things. And now it's too late to be like, I never learned, so I'm just going to go with what I know. Well, this is the time in which you build yourself as a professional that can truly build leadership for those that come behind you.
thank you so much for coming in. It was great to hear you speak. So round of
you.
applause again. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.